Hello, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here in conversation with Justice Muralidhar. And those of you who don't know, he's had a very illustrious and very important career. Initially as a public interest lawyer, during which he published a book on the entire question of legal aid. Then he became a judge, and he was a judge for, I think, 16 years, both serving in the Delhi High Court as well as in the Orissa High Court. And now, interestingly, we have a third phase, where he's gone back to being a lawyer for, I think, broadly put, public interest causes. We know that because of a range of matters for which he's got very, very important relief, including UAPA matters in Karnataka. So we know that this phase is actually equally significant as, I think, the previous phase. And the last point, I think those of you who have been following the papers would have noticed, he's also been appointed the chairperson of the Commission of Inquiry on the occupied Palestinian territory. So again, that's another very important role which we look forward to hearing more about. In this conversation, we will look a little bit at Justice Muralidhar's book it's called Incomplete Justice, within quotes as it were. And you see the book, it's got a range of, again, it draws upon his range of experience, where there are articles by judges, the articles by lawyers, article by civil liberties people, an article by P. Sainath, who's a journalist, the interviews, again with key people such as Indra Jai Singh, Upendra Bakshi. And so it's a very, and not to forget, sometimes I think, what cannot be said directly is said indirectly. Because each chapter is preceded by a cartoon, which sometimes gives you a segue or an insight into how you need to think about the issue at hand. With that kind of a brief introduction to the format of the book, the sections again, put it this way, all of you are interested in contemporary India and the role of the judiciary. This is a very interesting, a very important starting point, because in a way, you get an updated sense. What does it mean to be in India today? As a lawyer, as a judge, as an ordinary citizen, it's a great starting point to look at this particular book. And in that one particular section I'll begin with, which is the section looking at the criminal law. Again, there are three very important essays by three very important, people doing very important work in terms of criminal law, Rebecca John, Vrinda Grover, as well as Nithya Ramakrishnan. And I want to just begin with Rebecca's essay. She has a very interesting proposition. She refers to somebody called Dubber for the proposition that when we think of the law is what she calls both the police state and the law state. But the police state, she means that what I assume is a prerogative state, that there's no limits in what the police can do. The law state, by which she means there's a kind of regulation, or there's a way in which law begins to limit what the state can do. And in a sense, the struggle we're facing in India today is really a struggle between the normative state and the prerogative state, of the police state and the law state. So, Justice Muralidhar, would you like to offer any reflections on that current state? Also, you begin, very interestingly, the section begins with a cartoon of the continued imprisonment for Umar Khalid. So in a sense, that entire section is really a very important starting point for a conversation on India today. So I'll leave it to Justice Muralidhar to tell us a little bit of what he was thinking of in that particular chapter.
Yeah, that chapter at least looks at three kinds of issues. One is on core criminal procedural law. That's what Rebecca is actually speaking about. Nithya is talking of extraordinary laws. How over the last 75 years, and it's not a new phenomenon for those who may not be aware of India's experience with extraordinary laws. And Vrinda is focusing largely on sentencing. But if you ask me about a running theme, it's precisely what you spoke about, the increasing lawlessness of the state. I think that's one way of looking at their three chapters. When we talk of state here, state could include all the organs of state, not just the executive. So unless you have a complete collaboration or cooperation between the organs of state, these situations cannot come about. To give you an example, ADM Jabalpur. If the judiciary was not in sync with what the parliament was doing, and through the parliament the executive was doing, we could not have had an emergency with so much excess. So at various points in India's history, you find some of the organs are somehow in sync, completely belying the constitutional scheme of checks and balances. So the idea was, if the executive exceeds its powers, it goes rogue, you will have someone to check. Because the constitution, as Kannabrand keeps telling us, is a check on state power. Likewise, the legislature. So during the emergency itself, when they passed the 39th Amendment, and they said the power of judicial review will be taken away, the court was quick to protect that and said the 39th Amendment is illegal. But simultaneous with the 39th Amendment, they retrospectively amended the Representation of People Act to literally whitewash each of the corrupt practices for which Mrs. Gandhi was held to be disqualified to continue to be a member of parliament by Justice Jagmohan Lal Sinha of Allahabad. And that law, which retrospectively gave her a clean sheet, was upheld by that very bench which struck down the 39th Amendment. So it's very interesting how the three organs, the so-called organs of state, were in sync. Now, these three chapters tell us that at various points in our history, where the judiciary fails to see what it is meant to do, you will have a situation where the state can become lawless. So we used to say rule by law, rule of law. And the rule by law situation is one situation. But the rule dehorse law is another situation, like the bulldozers that we have now. So the Supreme Court can keep saying what it's saying, but the executive will do without consequences what it wants to do. And the parliament is reduced to just a bystander, and there's no real parliamentary democracy in action today as we see it. So I think these three chapters tell us the deterioration of that crafted balance in the constitution, where different organs were supposed to be check on each other's powers, and that's somehow broken down. That scheme is broken down.
To take up from that point, again, Rebecca's chapter references again, you just mentioned it, the dissent in ADM Jabalpur, where Justice Khanna makes the point that the history of civil liberties in India is largely the history of the insistence on procedure. So in a sense, the three chapters also focus very strongly on the possibilities of justice with insistence on procedure. So again, in the current climate, when, for example, you might see the constitution coming under increasing threat, would you give this as maybe an advice to lawyers, to law students, saying that sometimes the vision of the constitution remains in your head and in your mind, but what you need to have a greater grasp over, greater knowledge over, is really procedure. And what we learned from Justice Khanna is that insistence of procedure is one way of taking justice forward. And maybe you're the three protagonists here. It's very important that you choose all three of them. A very important work that they're doing in terms of consistently insisting on procedure to safeguard civil liberties in the country today.
Absolutely right, because our constitution, very interestingly, spells out procedure. And very often lawyers seem to miss the link between the constitution and criminal law. If you look at 20, 21, and 22, the three articles, they actually encapsulate the soul of criminal procedure. One is Article 20, the right against self-incrimination, no atrifois acquit, that you can't be tried and convicted for the same offense twice. Article 22, the three very valuable rights: the right to be produced before a court within 24 hours of arrest, the right to be told of the grounds of arrest, the right to have a lawyer of your choice. The three important rights which form the core of criminal procedure are all spelled out in the Constitution itself. So the Constitution makers wanted us to see the link between constitutional law and criminal law. And it took us several years to make those real links, thanks to Justice Krishna Iyer, who, because of his lived life, political life, and having undergone detention himself, could clearly understand what an executive preventive detention was, which is bypassing the judiciary, what producing before a court and what the magistrate is meant to do was. So, you have very, very important functions being performed by the magistrates in our country. When a person is produced for remand, the magistrate is expected to keep at the back of his head Article 22 of the Constitution, Article 20 of the Constitution, Article 21 of the Constitution. But very often it's done as something mechanical. Of course, from the side of the judiciary, you will have one magistrate dealing with some 200 remands a day. So practically, he cannot have an interaction with every person being produced. But that's where the scheme breaks down. So procedure is something that we have to insist on. Fortunately for us, in the last 5 years in the Supreme Court, although many negative things can be said, there are two important developments. One is the Prabir Purkayastha judgment, where the Supreme Court took the trouble of underlining the importance of this Article 22 and telling us, listen, whichever the court is, you may be produced at 3 a.m. in the morning, 4 a.m. in the morning, that judge is supposed to ask you, have you been told of your grounds of arrest? He's supposed to record in his order, yes, he has been informed of the grounds of arrest, and if he does not do that, the arrest itself becomes illegal. Now, on 6th November, this is again a development that the mainstream media seems to have missed. There's a very important judgment given by the bench of previous CJI, Justice Gavai and Justice Masi, where they've taken it a step further. The question was, does criminal procedure, the CRPC and now the BNSS, apply only to IPC laws? Does it not apply to PMLA? Does it not apply to UAPA? These are all those extraordinary laws. And there was a dichotomy there. Some courts saying, no, this applies only to the regular penal laws. This bench says, no, this rule that you have to be informed of the grounds of arrest applies to all criminal laws. Point number one. Point number two, and this is so significant, it has to be communicated in writing in the language in which that arrested person understands. This is so significant. If you remember, a person who's arrested in, let's say, Gujarat, who's supposed to be arrested by the police in Gujarat is found in Delhi. The Gujarat police will land up in Delhi, just pick up that person and produce him for a transit remand before a magistrate. Now that magistrate will be shown a warrant in Gujarati. Neither does the magistrate understand that warrant, and definitely the person arrested cannot be expected to understand that warrant. And if you apply the law now laid down by the Supreme Court, that arrest can be declared to be illegal straight away by that magistrate sitting in Delhi. Now this judgment has to now percolate down because of the mobility of populations. Like you have many Bangladeshi speaking people right here in Kochi who may not understand Malayalam. So a warrant in Malayalam shown to that person who's a Bangladeshi will not be understood by him. And, the magistrate is supposed to make that effort of finding out, have you done this task? So this actually brings about the whole constitutional scheme which encapsulates criminal procedure. And these three practitioners, they're very leading practitioners. They've handled some of the most difficult cases. And they're underscoring as a scheme of that entire chapter why it is important to insist on procedure, notwithstanding that the court sometimes may just overlook it. You still have to keep at it. Somewhere you have to get the court to record what you're saying, pointing out to the magistrate, listen, this is what the law says. If the magistrate's nothing doing, the lawyer should still say, yes, you can dismiss my point, but please record it. So that will help. The third thing is technology. Today in many of our courts, fortunately, we have live streaming. If not live streaming, we have hybrid hearings where a link is given to a certain court. So there is a way of even watching the proceedings. So that could be another effective tool that the lawyers can use. But this recording is very important. And if it is not recorded, at least you putting down in writing before the magistrate that please declare this arrest to be illegal, that's very important.
Thank you, Justice Muralidhar. So the point again which comes across very powerfully is the importance of the insistence of procedure. And Justice Muralidhar will not mention it, but I should just say it, that the Supreme Court judgment on Vatali is seen as the block as far as the grant of bail in UAPA cases is concerned. That overrules the division bench judgment in which he was the judge, in which the point was made precisely what he highlighted now is there in that judgment, where you're saying that the trial court cannot be the post office or the investigative agency, that if it does so, it will do more harm than good. And when you deal with the question of terror, you can't deal with it through this particular mechanism. So I think we all feel a sense of a deep tragedy. The fact that, and it's not just me saying this. Again, you see the book. There's an essay by Justice Shah and Justice Lokur as well, who's making the point with respect to judicial transfers. And they're making the point with judicial appointments and the opaqueness around that. And the fact that an extraordinarily extraordinary judge like Justice Muralidhar did not make it to the Supreme Court is our tragedy. And tragedy as far as people like you, Umar Khalid who are still in jail are concerned. And add to that one point actually. So one point is clearly procedure. But maybe the other thematic which is very much there in the book, again Justice Muralidhar comes from a tradition which is, he's both a judge and very civil liberties. I think lawyer in many, many ways. So the question I really want to ask you, because it links up to the essay or the conversation with Professor Bakshi, where he talks about the distinction between social action litigation and public interest litigation. The idea that the public should also be involved in the challenges of facing Indian democracy. That it comes to a matter like the UAPA, is there a role you think that the larger public has in terms of generating a deeper constitutional consciousness? Or is there you think, for example, I mean, the release of someone like that is contingent upon getting a sensitive judge? Or is it really contingent upon a larger public campaign? And that, of course, links up to Professor Bakshi's essay.
Yeah, I wish I could answer yes to both those questions, but unfortunately, the situation is not like that. So when we talk of the public, and there's one question I asked Professor Bakshi, what do we mean by public? Who is this public that we are talking about? So in our scheme of the Constitution, the public could be a numerical minority, and that's what the Constitution is meant for. You could have some individuals go up and assert their freedom of expression, their freedom of opinion, and persuade a court to say the decision taken by the majority in parliament is actually wrong, or the decision taken by the executive is arbitrary. So public interest litigation questions state power, abuse of state power. But what we find over the years is this public, since it's a loosely termed word, you could have anyone capture that space. So today we have in public interest litigation, all kinds of conflicting interests emerge, which is what it should be. If you go back to this phrase, deliberative democratic practice, probably public interest litigation provides a space for that. But then it becomes a cacophony. And unless you have judges who are mature, who are able to, handle these differences, you will have results arising in public interest litigation which you never wanted in the first place. And correcting those mistakes in the public interest litigation orders takes another exercise. So we are not clear about what we mean by the public. We need very mature judges. Like, let me give you an example of environmental activism, all right? So you had a phase in Delhi where there were industries, non-conforming industries, all over Delhi. It could be small welding workshops, mechanic workshops, or regular chemical industries, or anything. So one fine day, the court said, enough is enough. All this violates the urban plan, the Delhi master plan. They should all be shut down. So it was okay from the point of view of environment. But what they overlooked were all the workers in those units. They were just left high and dry. And the workers' families were left high and dry. The workers' children were left high and dry. So when you bring an issue of public interest litigation to the court, if the court begins to see it unidimensionally, you have a problem on hand. So that space which you are creating in the court has to be truly democratic. You should have everybody's voice heard, and you should have, as a court, the ability to deal with that, differences of opinions and, points of view. If you also are of a certain bent of mind, like you have judges who are very, very passionate about the environment, they may overlook everything else, and that creates a problem, a huge problem for those who are on the receiving end. So this public and public interest is a problem. But if you want to see Bakshi's interview in a different light, I think he's emphasizing that the system, the legal system, must be people-centric. Very often when we are dealing with issues in the court is looking at what are my problems as a court? What are my problems as an institution? The lawyers are saying, okay, what are our problems as lawyers? So the focus seems to be entirely around the main players in the system, which are judges, lawyers, and maybe legislators, maybe the bureaucracy. But we lose sight of that the entire system is meant to be working for the people. So even when we organize Lok Adalats, and we say, okay, on National Lok Adalat Day, we've disposed of, let's say, 5 crore cases. The phrase that Sriram Panchu uses in his book on mediation, settling for more, can be flipped around to say settling for less. So many of them are saying, okay, we are so tired of waiting in this legal system. Although my son was killed in a motor accident, and as a parent, I'm waiting for compensation. I'm entitled to compensation of, let's say, 20 lakhs. Since I waited in the system for 15 years, in this Lok Adalat, some very wise people are telling me, listen, you may not even get half of this amount even if you waited for 10 years more. I'm forced to accept something like 5 lakhs. And then the judiciary is having a press release saying, oh, what a great success this Lok Adalat has been. Even a Lok Adalat, therefore, is not people-centric. So we have to really look at very hard at the entire legal system and ask us how people-centric it is. And that is my take from Bakshi's interview. So he brings in his experience as both an academic and as a person who's engaged with the system through PIL. So just to the last part, we want people to engage with the system, not lose heart about saying, okay, what's the point in knocking the doors of the court? You do have judges in this system. And I ask you to draw a comparison between the public health system and the judicial system. Many of you in the audience will vouch for this, that there are few doctors in those public hospitals who are far better than the doctors in a private hospital. Because of the sheer number of patients they've seen, and they have an instinct to know what the patient needs. I wouldn't say this of every doctor, some of them. So some of their OPDs are just overflowing. I can straight away name Dr. Guleria. He's a known face because he's been during those COVID times on all our television screens most of the time. His OPD will be like a railway platform with not a place to sit. And the man comes into his OPD clinic at 7:30 in the morning, doesn't leave till 9 at night. I've seen that actually myself. So I tell this to judges in the judicial academies. We must be able to inspire others who will follow and do our best for the system. In this seat, ask yourself, what was the previous performance in this seat? If I can't improve it, at least I should not, do worse than what the previous incumbent did. So this engaging with the system, we have to continue to do. If you're in the criminal justice system, there's no choice. You have to engage with it. But there is a hope somewhere, down the line, like even the 2 judgments I spoke to you about, from the same court, which says that individual judges can make a difference in the system.
No, you're right. I mean, the Professor Bakshi piece, I thought was always a little opaque. I never understood his distinction between SAL and social action litigation and public interest litigation. But finally, what I understood he was trying to say is that the idea of litigation should also be a way in which you get a community into being. That is, can litigation help promote or bring into being an associational life of people themselves? For example, Rural Entitlement Litigation Kendra, the PUCL, a range of petitioners who actually represent a larger public, as it were. So that's the public involvement in the litigation process itself, as compared to, say, MC Mehta and others, are individual petitioners. So the idea of litigation and the idea of the public can't be disentangled. If you want justice, again, you must have, again, the answer to maybe Anuj Bhuvanya's critique would be that, sure, the judiciary can be a slum demolition machine. At the same time, the orders of the court have been very integral in protecting the rights people have. But if the people go before the court in a larger associational capacity, then they have a strength which is in the court and also outside the court. And the strength outside the court gets manifested inside the court. So is there a case to be made for more associations taking up matters before the court, where you have a strength at the ground level? And does that make a difference as far as the court's perception is concerned?
Yeah, so there have been instances where, despite associations taking cases to the court seems to have its own idea of what should be entertained and what should not. I'll give you an example of this Association for Democratic Rights in the SIR matter. It's now become just one of the petitioners. So the court is not giving a greater weight to ADR just because it represents. And it's got some very senior people who've been watching the system. Having said that, I must say there's a responsibility on PIL lawyers themselves. Very often PIL lawyers themselves do not conduct the cases democratically. For instance, I'm standing up for slum dwellers. I don't even tell the slum dwellers what's happening in the case, what their entitlements are, what is the law, why are they going to the court, what can be expected from the court. I have no interaction with them at all. But the very first day, they come and engage me, and they say, sir, somehow save our houses. And I say, yes. I don't go back to them to, tell them what is actually happening. This is a problem. So even people conducting these PIL cases are not themselves so democratic as they should. Second, and this is so important, I want to use this platform to make this point. We are not documenting these experiences. They may be negative experiences, positive experiences. Since it is public interest litigation, we as PIL lawyers owe it to the public to document this, to archive this, and to share this information. I can't privatize the information that I'm gathering in PIL. The RTI system is almost a failed system, although it's there on paper. 80% of the time, people are extremely frustrated in seeking replies from the government. PIL is another avenue where the government files a counter affidavit and shares the information it has in its files in the PIL. But if it is in a PIL in the Kerala High Court before a division bench, filed in a counter affidavit, let's say even by the central government, it is within the knowledge of the judge and the lawyers of that case. People in Rajasthan, Assam, Tripura are unlikely to know what exactly was said. And it could be an issue has larger dimensions. Let's say it's about CRZ violations in Kerala. Some policy decision taken by the government. It will equally apply in Orissa, it will equally apply in Gujarat. So the importance of archiving what happens in PIL, including the reports filed. Usually as a court in a PIL, I ask for expert committees to be appointed, or I ask for reports of experts. Those reports can't be made private information, can't be reduced to being some, privately held by some few people in their files. It has to be put on record. So in Orissa, during my tenure as Chief Justice, we created what is called a PIL portal. And on that portal, you can find all the pending public interest litigation cases in Orissa, the orders passed in those PILs, including the affidavits filed and the reports filed. Somebody may say, what about privacy, confidentiality? We've also indicated there, if anyone has an objection to something being affecting their rights to privacy, we can have a redaction on assessing what that claim is. But we can't therefore deny this information to the public. So tomorrow you think, okay, pollution is a big problem. Let's say even in a city like Kochi, and you want to go with a PIL. You think you're the first person who thought about it. Actually, 10 years ago, there was another PIL, and it's already pending in the court. You have no information on it, right? The present Chief Justice has no memory of that petition. And this present Chief Justice again starts entertaining this, starts passing orders which may be contrary to the orders passed earlier. So I'm saying the institutional memory, the memory of the public, all that needs to be preserved. So PIL, if it has to be really useful, this aspect has to be looked into.
Thank you. We'll go to the other thematic in the book, which is the entire question of gender justice. And there's a very important interview with Indra Jaisingh again on the question of gender justice, and she focuses very strongly on the question of sexual harassment in terms of by judges. That's one kind of a framework, or which judges have done to them. That's the other thing she focuses on. But I want to ask you a question with respect to, again, when we're assessing the Supreme Court at 75, arguably, one area where the success has been great is in terms of the understanding of what do you mean by discrimination on grounds of gender, and particularly the jurisprudence and stereotypes. Where, for example, I think there's a very rich jurisprudence on the question of stereotypes under which women are forced to labor, and how the stereotypes amount to violation of your right to equality under both 14 and 15. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So the positive examples and the negative examples. Positive example is about non-commissioned officers in the armed forces. So the court has really cut through that. The so-called glass ceiling has got shattered, and the court has persisted with the case. This is very important. A judge delivers a judgment, says you can't treat men and women differently among commissioned officers of the armed forces. Then the judge finds that, okay, they've equated them in terms of pay, but they're again discriminating in terms of promotions. So they come back to the court. The court says, no, promotions can't be denied. But it's because that same bench is continuing. So sometimes a bench changes in the Supreme Court, the reaction can be very different. Fortunately, in this issue, the bench continued. And so, it could take it logically forward. the negative example, women standing for the post of sarpanch in a panchayat. You have a disqualification. You say if you have more than 2 children, if you have not passed 12th, you are disqualified. And it's a completely regressive law when you talk of women's equality, because rural women have very little choice on whether they want to have a third child or not. And the judges deciding this case say, no, rural women are very enlightened, completely ignoring the social realities, and they've upheld a law like this. So actually the woman suffers for the sake of gender, right? And this is also the same Supreme Court. Today, again, I'm finding very recently, those challenges in some high courts are getting negatived. The same challenges are emerging, saying how can you have more restrictions on women, aspiring for political positions, and the court doesn't seem to get it. And these are bad precedents. So, but then you have to continue engaging. So the third area, which is of course Nalsa judgment, which was preceded by the Nas Foundation judgment. And I must tell all of you, one of the earliest instances of live, not tweeting, because I think Twitter was not there then, instances of exactly what transpired in court, keeping a record of the dialogue between the bench and the bar, is a book which has been authored by Arvind, The Right That Dares to Speak Its Name. So if you read that, it's a small booklet, you will actually get to see what transpired in court. What did an additional Solicitor General say? What did the judges say to that? What did the petitioner's lawyer say to that? So this actual recording of the proceedings helps us understand the various dimensions of the Nas Foundation case, which I don't think all those dimensions were captured in the Navtej Johar. But there's an arc, and the court seems to have been able to push that arc forward. Although Nas Foundation suffered a reverse in Sudesh Kaushal, it got strongly affirmed by the 9-judge bench in Puttaswamy. 3 of the judges who constituted the Puttaswamy bench actually have said in their judgment that Nas was decided correctly and Sudesh Kaushal wasn't. So when the Navtej Johar petition came up 2 years down the line, 9 years after Nas, the judges have very little trouble in actually, decriminalizing same-sex under 377 of the IPC. What I'm saying is sometimes the push comes from the court and takes the issue forward, but sometimes the court disappoints us, which is why we call this book Critical Reflections, because that's the whole idea. Unlike the Supreme Court of, say, the United States, or say even the High Court of Australia, judges in India, Supreme Court judges in India don't sit en banc. That is, they don't sit together. So today, actually, in the Supreme Court, you have 17 courtrooms. And you may have as many as 17 benches of the Supreme Court. There are 34 judges of the Supreme Court. And any lawyer will tell you the same petition taken before, let's say, court number 3, will not receive the same, result when you take it before court number 8 or court number 9. This is a reality that lawyers in the Supreme Court are actually facing. So they strategize, of course, around all this uncertainty. But having said all that, it's a dynamic court where issues get brought before the court, a wide range of topics, and you could have different reactions from different benches. And you learn to live with all of that. Just as noisy as a democracy the population is, as the courts are as noisy and maybe as chaotic.
When we look at this book, Incomplete Justice, what it does not document is the work of, obviously, Justice Muralidhar. Right? That's the part which is really not there. And just on that point which Justice Muralidhar just mentioned, the Nas Foundation decision in 2009 was a bench on which Justice Shah and Justice Muralidhar sat together on that particular bench. And the importance of that, again, is that it's a very interesting point. In terms of the language which it gave us, is the language of constitutional morality. Again, you'll think that Ambedkar made this speech in the Constituent Assembly, everybody should be knowing it, everybody should be citing it, but actually not true, 2009, they discovered it for the first time, and they used it in Nas Foundation, and the Supreme Court has invoked it time and again after that. So there's really a way in which, as Justice Muralidhar said, there's an arc of justice, and it begins in Nas, and culminates in some sense in Navtej. But then the question again on that to you is, how do you see the marriage equality judgment and the disappointment of that judgment rendered? I'll give you maybe one provocation, see how you respond to that. The difference between Nas Navtej and Supriya would be, Nas Navtej took 17 years over a long period of time. There was a movement involved, there's a way in which there's a litigation was a social legal process, and the idea was that you need to change mindsets much as you need to change the law. Because again, gender, sexuality, caste, this is really about how you change the way people think, as much as about how you change the law, and the two are really connected and interlinked. And with hundreds of protests on, say, 377 over that period of time, the marriage equality was all of 3 years, from beginning to end. And so there's a way in which you couldn't really get the public involved. There's a way in which you really didn't have an idea, you know. I mean, is there a single protest in the country where marriage equality? I can't think of a single protest we had. So, in a sense, again, this question of litigation, social movements, do you think that the litigation was premature?
I think you've answered it. This is a perfect rhetorical question, anticipating my answer. Actually, a lot of work needs to go into building public opinion. And you have a critical mass of public opinion that then percolates to the judges. Judges watch the same television as you do, watch the same social media, look at the same forwards on WhatsApp. So they're all products of society itself. So we should anticipate that. The fourth prong, which you probably didn't mention, was religion. And you know, some of the petitioners are asking for legalizing same-sex marriage was saying, we are not interested just in a special marriage act. I want a Hindu marriage. Somebody said, I want a Muslim nikah. So what is the answer we can give them? Why should they abandon their religion? This is something that we don't seem to ask. We presume that the entire queer community is of the same politics. They're not of the same politics at all. They've got so many, that's why it's a rainbow, right? That's your identification, that you cannot be bracketed, confined to, And the other important question which the judges asked, which there's no satisfactory answer, what is the marriageable age for a same-sex marriage? So somebody said 18, somebody said 21, the third lawyer said we'll leave it to the court. No, how can we leave these things to the court, right? We must have some idea of what the public feels about it. And does everyone want a special marriage? Does everyone only want a registered marriage? I'm afraid not. You'd know best, Arvind, that even in the queer community, they want some kind of a ritual, right? They want some kind of an exchange. They don't want to simply go and sign a register. So who's going to define these things? Which will be the mechanism to validate this? We haven't really thought through. So there are times when I feel there's something called a bottom-up process. Just to give you examples, the Manrega Act is a bottom-up process. The RTI Act is a bottom-up process. Just to explain what I'm trying to say, there are people's movements demanding for a law. The people's movements itself prepares a draft of the law, takes it to the people, has it debated, and then brings it up. And that is then tabled before the parliament, right? The National Food Security Act is a bottom-up process. The Tribal Rights Act, the Forest Rights Act now, the present one, is a bottom-up process. The 2013 Land Acquisition Act is again a bottom-up process. So we seem to overlook that there is a possibility there of a bottom-up process. If you don't do that, then you'll have the problem of what's happening with the Nalsa judgment. Judgment is progressive, recognizes the rights of transgenders. It takes Parliament another 5-6 years to make a law. It is still a top-down process. So the transgenders feel we've not been consulted. They're very unhappy with the law that's come. They said, okay, we had a victory in court, but we couldn't see the translation of the victory into real change for us, into engage with the system. So here, I think it's important, therefore, like you correctly said, to build a critical mass of public opinion and to take on the difficult questions. In NAS, we have to take on all the religious bodies. I think in Navtej, they were not there at all. But in Supriyo, they emerged again. Because this something touches a raw nerve when it comes to religious bodies. And if you don't take into account the diversity of religious opinion, then you will face a backlash. So, in fact, one criticism of both NAS and Navtej is it's kind of an elitist litigation. And it is really not percolated. Homophobia is still a reality. Not just in our country, even in the US and Europe. Correct? So I think a bottom-up process is something that we could try.
Thank you, Justice Muralidhar. Lots more questions I have, but I think we need to open it out now. So, yeah, maybe we'll take 3 comments together and then we can move from there. Yeah. Yeah. 3 of you all in the front, yeah.
So, as a judicial practitioner of an impeccable order, do you think there has been an intentional delay in delivering justice in Umar Khalid's case?
I think it's a combination of factors, and it should have happened much earlier. In fact, bail application should not be argued like it was argued in the High Court for some months on end. Bail applications are not meant to be argued like this at all. One way of explaining it is saying, like Arvind was mentioning, the UAPA, the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, which shifts the burden of showing prima facie innocence on the accused, when all that the accused has is a charge sheet which shows everything against him or her. So it's a Herculean task. You can't possibly demonstrate when the matter has not even gone to trial. You don't want it to go for trial. So this makes it impossible for them to get bail. So the process itself becomes the punishment. So there has to be time limits even for arguing a bail application to UAPA at all levels, at the first level, second level, third level. Even the Supreme Court, I would, without fear of contradiction, say now, most of us feel you can't have a hearing going on and on like this. Even for Sonam Wangchuk, how can you postpone by a month? The man is asking for release on bail. So this is something we have to do serious introspection on. We can't have these kind of delays. How can the Supreme Court then have the moral authority to tell the trial court, listen, why are you sitting on these bail applications for so long? You yourself are sitting on these applications for long. I think Umar Khalid's application should have been taken up long ago. One of the parameters for deciding on bail is if the person is no longer required for investigation. And in Khalid's case, that was crossed longer. Not just Khalid. We're always talking of Khalid. There's a cluster of them. And, there's a time to test all this evidence. But you don't need these people for investigation. And these people are not going to run away. They are actually people who are passionate about this country. They're not going to run away anywhere. So I think all those parameters, if they apply, there should be no reason to deny. This is what I personally feel.
Justice, it's a supplementary, a question which I could not ask Dr. Justice Chandrachud. He said, bail is the rule and jail is an exception. What more could you do? This is what I wanted to ask him. But then I was voted out.
See, there is a larger question there on Master the Roster. See, in this audience itself, let's say 10 of us feel that Khalid should be granted bail. There could be 10 others saying, no, people like this should not be coming out on bail at all. Okay. Now, as a Chief Justice of India, I know my court, right? I know how the judges generally react. All lawyers will tell you, in this court, it's impossible to get bail. In that court, sometimes you may get, sometimes you may not. In this court, it's very easy to get bail. This, from the day the legal profession started, this has happened. Okay, so in a court, you'll always find judges of different inclinations. As a Chief Justice, you have to keep track of this. Because I've been a Chief Justice of one High Court, I can tell you, I get daily reports on how the bail roster is moving. I should share an experience with you. I was told this by a senior judge of the Supreme Court much after his retirement, who came from the Andhra Pradesh High Court. He'd been a civil practitioner all his life. So one of those times he sat on the criminal roster. So every day there would be at least 100 bail applications. This man, every time he looked at an FIR, would get shocked. He said, oh my God, I can't grant bail to a person like this. At the end of the second day, not a single bail had been granted. So the criminal bar was completely up in arms, saying, what kind of a judge is this? He doesn't seem to understand how the criminal law process works. Fortunately, the judge himself spoke to the Chief Justice and said, I will not be able to handle this roster because I've had no exposure to criminal law. But how many judges are going to be honest enough to say this? So the Chief Justice keeps a track. I know if too many bails have been granted, even let's say NDPS cases, I know it's not a good thing. I know if no bail is being granted, even in offenses which are punishable for less than 7 years, again, it's a bad scene. So I keep track of this. I need somebody with a more balanced. So as a Chief Justice of India, I can't say all my judges, there's no difference between A and B. I mean, this is too naive, I would say, for an explanation. I definitely know what are the inclinations of many of these judges. So when I send a petition to a certain bench, I know the chances of bail for that bench. I can no longer plead, whether it's Supreme Court lawyers, High Court lawyers, Chief Justice of India, or Chief Justice of High Court, they all know their judges, they know the inclinations of the judges. they somewhere determine the fate of matters by marking a certain case to a certain bench. So they can no longer simply claim, oh, no, it's a, a roll of dice, it can go anywhere. So we are no longer able to say this. And as lawyers, we immediately say, oh, the chances of bail are next to nil if it goes before this bench. We have come to that position. So unless you take a critical view, and this is something that we should debate in public. There was a time when two benches of the Supreme Court, and this has all been documented, on death penalty, they found one bench never awarded the death penalty. And one bench not only confirmed every death sentence, even went to the extent of enhancing life sentence to death sentence. You have clear track records. And as Chief Justice of India, when I know this is the trend, I must do something about it. Otherwise, even cases that don't deserve a death penalty are going to end up having the death penalty. And you can't literally decide life and death by which bench this case is going to go before. So this is something that we need to be very, very vocal about, and we have to speak in the public domain on this unhesitatingly. And we have to question power, whichever power this is. This is an administrative power of a Chief Justice to determine who will hear this kind of case. And that has to be exercised responsibly, very responsibly.
Sir, I have two questions. One is, there is a murder. The assassin was caught by police and presenting the court. But the judgment will be after a long time.
Correct.
But next question, another question, there is a riot. The government appointed a justice, judicial inquiry. And judicial inquiry is done, the report submitted. This is judicial inquiry by the retired justice. But the statement will never be taken action.
Yeah, I think we got the question.
Yeah. So on the Commission of Inquiry, the best way for the government, I don't know if you've seen those yes minister, yes prime minister. If it's a very ticklish issue, the best way for the government to avoid taking a call is to appoint a committee or a Commission of Inquiry. And the Commission of Inquiry's report hardly has any, weight. Unlike in England where they're supposed to table an action-taken report, our country, it's been an utter failure, all these commissions of inquiry. Even I would say the SITs, the so-called SITs that we are asking for, if you look at the regular criminal law, even the BNSS, there's no provision for a special investigating team at all. So the Supreme Court judge simply says, I'll take a retired DIG from the other state, I'll take some retired judge from this state, they'll sit and form an SIT. This is all completely extra-legal, extra-constitutional, should not be encouraged at all. It's a waste of time. It's a big disappointment for people who go before such commissions of inquiry, risk a lot, speak before them, only to find no actions taken. On the first question on delay, there are enough provisions in the law for saying that you should deliver it in time, not given unnecessary adjournments. But we've not understood how lawyers behave and how judges interact with lawyers in a court which is overburdened. How does judge prioritize a case? How does the judge enforce time limits? These are big challenges in a system which is already creaking under arrears of long years of cases. Prioritizing cases, there are enough reports written about it. We have the means to deal with this, but we don't have the will to deal with this. We're not engaging with the lawyers enough. And lawyers, when you bring about some of the reforms, when you say, okay, all old cases will be taken up, let's say on Thursdays, from 10:30 onwards, only old cases will be called out. Some bar somewhere will go on strike. So unless you consult the lawyers, you take them into confidence, you cannot push many of these reforms. So this is a big challenge before us, and that hopefully will address the issues of delays. In fact, there's a chapter in this book on judicial delays, which you will find very interesting. You're talking of delays in individual cases. We're talking of delays in major cases. The Bhopal gas disaster, for instance, demonetization, right? Electoral bonds. All those decisions came several years later. When you're turning around and telling the court, what are you going to do now? The situation is long crossed. So that chapter really takes a very hard look at how we're using delays to deny justice.
Good morning, sir. Thank you for speaking from your heart. So, sir, my name is Matthews. My question is, you are the chairman of the international inquiry in the occupied
Yeah, I would
Palestine.
not like to take questions on that yet, sir, if you don't mind.
No, only my question is very engineering solution. Why can't you build a wall between the Israel and
I
Palestine?
will not answer this question,
Yeah?
sir. Pardon me, I can't answer this question, sorry.
Okay. Yeah,
There are some protocols that I'm supposed to follow now, so that's why.
Hi, sir. My question is regarding the changes made from IPC to BNS.
Yes.
And few sections are yet to be clarified upon,
Yes.
specifically mentioning section 377.
Correct.
It has been abolished altogether in the
That's right.
BNS.
Yeah.
And a few things regarding same-sex rape and bestiality are no longer is criminalized in BNS, and there are quite a few incidents that happened recently in Kerala. Although the police and law have managed to make up for it by utilizing other laws, but don't you think there needs to be further updation made in BNS by the government?
Certainly, yes. Arvind will have some things to say to you after the meeting is over. Because it's a highly debated thing. It's a very valid question, but highly debated. There's been a demand to make the rape laws, if you don't mind, sir, rape laws gender neutral. And there's a resistance to that too. And there's a valid point on this side too, why it should not be gender neutral. But it's a very, very highly debated issue. You're right, there is a vacuum now because the legislators have somehow not understood. Again, the same problem, sir. We don't do real consultation before we make a law. This is a big, big problem. We don't see who is affected. Like I think I shared with all of you something called judicial impact assessment. When I tweak a law, I don't ask myself what is the burden it's going to place on the courts. I don't ask what is the burden it's going to place on the litigant. I create a tribunal. For the litigant, it means extra cost, more waiting time, more rounds of appeal. So when I make changes in law, I neither keep the people in mind, nor keep the system in mind, nor keep the institution. I'm just saying, so many things we don't really carry out an effective consultation. And this is one instance. You know, it was passed in such a great hurry, as if it's going to be, you know, this is another one of those midnight moments, no? It's become a fetish now to pass some of these laws at midnight, as if it's going to usher a big change. Anyway, that's a debate for another time.
So there are many people who want to ask questions, but unfortunately we are out of time. So we'll have to stop here. Sorry, everybody.
I just wanted to end with a light moment. So there was a lookout for Osama bin Laden, right? World over. So some police constable in Haryana told his SHO, Osama to mil gaya, sir. He said, Osama mil gaya? And he showed him a clip on the photo on the mobile. He said, ye hai Osama. He said, ye Osama thirda hai. He said, sir, usko mana lenge na. Ye to admit kar dega. So the tool of investigation is that we use only torture, right? The lathi. And today, the police thinks it can solve any and every case using this. So this is something that we need to reflect on. Because when we started with this theme of lawlessness, this is something that the courts are not able to grapple with. Judicial encounters, disappearances. Our law doesn't seem to accommodate that. So while we talked of all those three criminal laws, despite the experience of 75 years with all these things of false fake encounters and disappearances, these criminal laws don't account for that at all. So we must, as a people, be more vocal at the risk of our own safety and speak up. If you don't enforce our rights in the Constitution, those rights may vanish.